Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Thrive, Not Just Survive. I am so grateful that you all are joining me on this journey of self-exploration, inward reflections, and figuring out who we are and what we're doing here. So today I want to talk about relationship and relationship currency. I've been taking a course, and if you're on my Facebook, you've probably seen me post some things about doing what's called a personality assessment. And what this is although some people have asked me, is it the same as the DISC personality or some of the other ones that are out there? The thing is, we can say that it's the same, but yet it's very different, because what the bank methodology in terms of personality assessment is the science behind what makes people say yes or no. And this is not just buying behavior in terms of a client, it's in terms of communication with our relationships all around, be it our spouse, our children, our friends, our coworkers, and just general communication overall. So what this is it's a science based on codes that each person has that are value-based. And once you know your code, you understand why you do certain things in a certain manner in a certain time frame. Now, each code has its own ways of talking. So it's like a language, and we call that, your code, right? So if you're interested, I've put the assessment link to the chat box, and you are welcome to go in and take the test. It'll take less than 90 seconds. And once you know your code, run your family members and figure out their codes, because once you know that code, you'll be able to communicate with them in the language that they understand, and you will find more harmony in your relationships. So today, what Dr. Cheryl and I will be talking about is this whole idea about harmony in relationships, communication, and what makes the fact that some people have really great, strong relationships, and sometimes what we find in other relationships, what may really be a struggle, or sometimes it's, a battle because two different personality codes are not communicating properly. So I'm going to bring Dr. Cheryl on so we can talk a little further about the science behind all of this. And she's going to share her experience, because she's done some amazing interviews and blogs on just this very topic. So let me bring her on. Hi, Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me again on this beautiful Friday.
Hey, Nasira, always fun to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. And today I'm not going to complain to you about the weather, because we have a beautiful, sunny, warm day. So I'm very happy.
Wonderful. 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 It's a little cool here right now, not very. I don't have my gloves this week. And it was 80 something here yesterday. So it's going to be another wonderful, really nice hot day.
That's awesome. So today we're going to talk about relationships. And we really, last week, kind of talked on our own about your experience with the show that you've done in terms of your blogs and radio show, and how the science of relationships, like as you interviewed people, what you learned from it. So if you can share your insight, that would be amazing.
Well, it's actually been a really, really interesting journey. And I think that what I learned the most from was an interview that I did with two couples back a few years back. I think it was in 2011 that I did the first interview, and it was a Valentine's Day interview. And I did this particular show because I wanted to find out what made relationships last. So I interviewed two couples who had been married for over 50 years
Wow.
and listened to what they had to say about what made their relationships last. And they were, two very different couples. And there were actually four couples, three couples involved, because my parents were one of them, and they also had a couple of friends of theirs with them. So I was able to talk to them as well as the third couple. And it was really quite interesting hearing what they had to say. But I've heard that echoed over and over again as I talk to people, as I observe people, and I look at relationships that are surviving and thriving, and relationships that are floundering and failing. The most important thing that I could discern in terms of making relationships last was not love per se. People think that we have to be just passionately, romantically in love, and if we are, we're going to go riding off into the sunset and it's going to last forever. That's absolutely not the case because relationships take work. But most importantly, what relationships need in order to have a good relationship is communication. People think you need chemistry to have relationship. I don't know if you read the Harlequin romance stories, but there was always something in these Harlequin romance stories where there was conflict, and in that conflict, the woman may have hated the man or the man may have hated the woman, but eventually they came to this wonderful, passionate, romantic love. One of the things that was always a key element to those, though, whether they were romantically in love from the beginning or whether they were on polar opposite ends, was they developed communication. There may have been a spark in some of the relationships, but the primary ingredient that brought them close was communication.
Right.
We see marriages that are arranged in lots of countries, and I've talked to a number of women who have been in arranged marriages. It's like, well, you were put into a marriage with a man that you may not have even known. You may not have liked him in the beginning. Are you content in this marriage? And do you think this works? And interestingly enough, even though they didn't select this man, they may have been passionately in love with someone else on the other side, but they conceded to the arranged marriage. After time, they were very much in love with their husbands. It was a different kind of love, maybe. Some of them had fallen romantically in love with
Mm-hmm.
their husbands, but the majority of them loved their husbands. And the difference was that in the beginning of relationships, even if we select and we're passionately in love with that person, it's our hormones talking to us, and it's our hearts talking to us. And no one really completely knows what love is, but we do know that it is a large series of chemical processes that happen and a large series of physiological responses that feed on themselves. For example, if you like somebody, your pupils dilate. When you're in love with somebody or you love them, your pupils dilate even more. But what changes in the relationship between liking somebody and loving somebody is not only your pupils dilate, but you look into their eyes longer. And the only two people who, quote, stare into each other's eyes are lovers and babies and mothers.
Wow.
Babies and mothers will stare into each other's eyes for extended periods of time. The only one who's allowed that privilege besides your baby is your loved one. And part of the reason for that is because our eyes are a tremendous source of communication for us. I am sure that you've had the experience where your child or your sister or someone, their mouth is going wah, 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 telling you something, and you're looking into your eyes and you're saying, I know they're lying to me. They're not telling me the truth.
Yep.
Because the eyes, as they say, the eyes are the windows of the soul. people can learn to mask that, but even people who are very, very good at it tend to have a tell in the expression of the eyes. So lovers look into each other's eyes and read the communication. Lovers study each other's faces as they're speaking because our facial expressions tell a lot about what we're thinking or saying. You see that in cases where there may be a couple across the room from each other. They may or may not know each other, but there is a chemistry and their eyes connect, and you can look at the faces and you can read what's going on in the faces, that this isn't just a random person that they looked at, that this person has sparked their interest, and the other person is reading that too. From across a room, we can communicate.
Right.
Even more importantly, verbal communication has got to be authentic for a relationship to actually flourish. It's much more difficult when someone is saying things, but they're not really saying what they mean. What happens at that time is that the person is reading the eyes, is reading the face, the mouth is saying things that are incongruent. So the brain is having to work overtime to figure out what the real meaning is. And though it wants to believe what it's seeing, it can't help but hearing what the words are saying. And it's having difficulty processing that when it happens. And we've talked in previous sessions about stress and releasing cortisol and different hormones. And when things don't match like that, then there's an incongruence and it causes stress. And anytime that we kick into a stress cycle, it makes the communication more difficult because then we're communicating from a point of defense and we're communicating from a point of no longer listening. Listening is essential to good communication.
And this also relates to emotional intelligence, right? If you're thinking about actually listening to the other person, it has to be not in the attempt of your response to that, but to actually listen and hear what they're saying before you have the response. So there's this whole processing going on, like you said, between the physical features or the eyes and the your communication with your body and your tone and the words that are actually coming out. So the brain is trying to process it
Exactly.
all, right? And
Exactly. Exactly. And what happens, I mean, I'm sure that you have seen it happen. We're all in the digital era, and we've all texted on our phones. And we texted a message because the person isn't seeing us, they're not reading what's happening in our faces. We text something that we mean to be funny, and our faces are smiling and we think we're being cute. And the response that comes back across the text is that the person is hurt or angry. And they're going, why would you say that to me? Or they're making a comment that's expressing that they're upset. And depending on how they communicate that, we may in turn then become defensive. And so people start spatting over the text when the original inciting comment was not meant to hurt or to anger the other person. It may have been meant to inform, or it may have just been pure, simple humor. And the other person did not know that we were being funny. They thought we were being catty, or they thought we were being mean. They couldn't understand our communication because they didn't have the full scope of it. We also have that happen in telephone conversations. When we're separated from people, we're going along, we're having a conversation on the phone, and we say something, and then we hear the other person's voice change, the tone changes. We can hear that they're irritated with us or they're angry with us. And we're like, well, what is your problem? And why did you get snappy? What's going on?
Mhm.
And that person has responded to something that they thought they heard in the conversation because they didn't have all of the communication cues. The more emotionally mature we are, the more that we're able to sit back and actually listen to what the words are saying and not read in what we think. And we do read into what other people are saying based on our own personal experiences, based on our own emotional place. If we're in an emotional place where we are very sensitive for some reason, or perhaps we just had a bad day and all of those brain hormones are already cranked up and they're flying around and we may be in that fight or flight position again, then we may not hear what that person is really trying to say. And it may not have anything to do with what they said at all.
Right. And I think this is the take it from their perspective. If you can
Yes.
listen and take it from their perspective for whatever is being said, you take that first initial reaction, that emotional reaction out of the equation, because then you are handling it from a higher intelligence. I call it, and I've been learning a lot about emotional intelligence, that when you're coming from it from that place, then you can look at it from their perspective and not react, but
Yes.
at least listen and hear
Yes.
what they're saying, and then come up with a response. And if it's more clarification that's needed, then to ask for that rather than assume what you think they're trying to say.
Yes. An example is a woman may ask her husband, do you like this dress, honey? And he hears her say, do you like this dress, honey? And he takes that at face value. He looks at the dress and he says, nah, that one doesn't look so good on you. Maybe another one. And he's just expressing his preference for the dress. It may be he doesn't like the color of the dress or whatever. She hears, that dress looks awful on you and you're fat.
Right.
That's not what he said, but that's what she heard. And that's because she came from a place of emotional listening. She
Yes.
did not hear what he said. She did not even care what his answer really was because in her mind, she had looked at herself in the dress and decided she was fat. So if he had said, yes, that's a wonderful dress, she would have been reassured she was okay. But because he did not like the dress, she took it personally that it
Right.
was about her image. So we have to listen to what the other person is saying. And as you said, we have to see it from their viewpoint, not from where we're coming from emotionally at that particular moment. We also have to take into consideration how we process things, what emotional baggage we may be bringing into the conversation. Because the way we've dealt with things in the past, if we haven't done a lot of introspection to understand who we are, doing things like this survey that you're sending out, if we haven't done a lot of that kind of thing to understand ourselves, we have a pattern of interacting that we have developed since childhood. And one of the things that most people have not been taught is how to communicate. And the bigger part of that is how to listen. Most of us hear, but most of us do not listen. We hear what we want to hear, and we haven't been trained to tune in to what the other person is saying, to what the cues are that they're throwing as to what their meaning may be. An example of this is I have patients come into my office and they'll say, "Doctor, I have a sore throat, about this sore throat." And within just a couple of seconds, I can read them and say, "This is not about a sore throat at all." And have the conversation that leads me to, "I think I've been having a heart attack. And I came in because of this sore throat because this heart attack idea is really frightening to me."
Right.
Not only that, I can talk to them a little further and discover that it's not about their heart attack at all because they're not having one. What it's about is the fact that on this day, 5 years ago, they lost their mother to a heart attack. And so they've connected to that. That's what they're communicating when they come in. But I can only get there if I'm very quickly reading all of the cues that they're sending. And
Right.
in order for relationships, whether they're a relationship with your doctor or a relationship with your significant other, you have to connect to them and read the cues.
So can you tell me, like, the interviews you did, what insight did they give you? Because these were 50 years plus in marriage, right? What were the insights
Mhm.
that you got from relationships? And of course, they had a different era, not this technology era of texting and all of this. So, kind of looking at it from the perspective of two human beings having this length of time together, what were the insights that you got or the nuggets of wisdom?
One of the biggest nuggets of wisdom was, as I said, was the communication was the most important thing. The other big nugget of wisdom that they imparted was tolerance, that each person is an individual and they bring a certain set of things to the table. And if you go into the relationship looking for Prince Charming that's going to be perfect, you're going to fail. Communicating with the partner about things that are seriously deal breakers for you is important. Letting your partner know, when you do this, this is how I feel. Can we do something different? Working through things was very important. Again, accepting others' frailties became important. I believe that one of the couples was Shirley and Louis Dahl, and I believe that Shirley said, "Well, Louis did this, that, or the other thing," and she laughed and she's like, "Whatever." And in a relationship, if the person is not meeting your expectations because they pick their toes or whatever it is, you have to do a lot of whatever. You have to pick your battles as to the things that you're going to focus on to discuss if they're disagreeable things. And you have to work through those things that are important. One of the things that you cannot do is sweep them to the back, sweep them aside. I remember my grandmother used to tell me, never let the sun go down on your anger. Discuss things out before you go to bed and kiss and make up. And that was very sage advice. And these two couples talked about things like that. Now, my mother and father were not that couple because my mother could hold a grudge for months. Over the years, however, she mellowed out and she learned that her relationship worked much more smoothly and effectively if she didn't carry on the grudge forever, if she talked to my father and they worked things out. Not that that always happened soon, but it did happen sooner at the end.
Right.
So you learn things about yourself and you learn things about the other person along the way, and you have to incorporate that learning into the process, and never be afraid to ask a question that you think may improve the relationship, even if you don't think you want to hear what the answer is. Ask the question anyway, because it starts a communication. And again, that communication is vital. Both, both interesting point, both couples talked about doing things together, but also doing things apart. You know, when we talk about marriage, we talk about two becoming one, and they said that that's nonsense. You become a union, but you're still two separate people and you have two separate sets of needs that you have to nurture. And it isn't fair to the other person to expect that other person to meet all of your needs. You have to be accountable for your own happiness. And if you are happy and whole within yourself, then you have a fountain of love to give to the other person. If you cannot love yourself, then you can't give freely to the other person because you're empty. And if you're giving to that other person, resentment comes up because you're taking away from yourself. So they did talk about loving yourself separately, having your own separate life, your separate, things that you do that you enjoy, but also doing things together that are meaningful to both of you.
And I guess that's the balance and the harmony is achieved when you come up with that formula that works for both people, and to have respect through
Yes.
that. So Tony Robbins says, the quality of your life is in direct proportion to the quality of your relationship. So when you hear that, it kind of tells you that, if the quality is lacking, look at the relationships, because it's causing a level of stress, a level of disharmony, and a not, coherence, right? Or a bringing together of
Yes.
needs, desires, aspirations, whatever those things are, right? So I think that, you've touched on so many beautiful things, and we hear this all the time, right? Don't go to bed angry. Communicate. And these are great things that we can get when you're feeling really good about a relationship. They sound
Mhm.
beautiful. But when you're going through a spat or an argument or some sort of discourse, these things are something you have to consciously bring into your awareness and say, it's
Yes.
important to communicate in a healthy way, not to bicker or to attack the other person.
Yes.
If you're coming in with,
Yes.
I'm ready to fight, then you're going to have a fight, right? So I think that, the whole idea is to be aware of how important communication
Yes.
is, how important it is to go to bed without that anger. And when it's happening, to actually consciously come to it and say, I'm going to fix this now.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, one of the other things that I have noticed about relationships is if your if your love relationship isn't working and there's a lot of friction in it, particularly if you see this happening over and over again, you have people who are just in serial relationships and they're having a lot of friction and it's just over and over again, or they're like, I always get the same person or whatever, then usually if you look at their other relationships in their lives, they're having these same sorts of difficulties. And if you find that you're one of these people that is having all of these difficulties, don't blame everybody else. Take a minute to step back and look at yourself and ask yourself, how am I communicating? Let me put myself into other people's choose. Or what I always tell people is put yourself into the position of advising a good friend. What would you tell that good friend? And then take your own advice. Because we have a tendency to have, just profound wisdom when it comes to other people, but we don't as often apply that wisdom to ourselves. And really, a lot of us do have very good wisdom and we have very good relationship advice. We have to learn to take our emotions out of what we do and listen to our own advice. And then relationships all the way around go smoother. And I would like to say when people are disagreeing, there come points when you're at an impasse. And it's at this time that the discussions tend to escalate and that relationships can be broken because we can say things that we cannot take back. So I always advise people, and this is what both couples or all three couples advised people, was that if you're in the midst of a heated relationship, sometimes you have to step back. Sometimes you have to step to neutral corners, go take a walk, separate yourself, woosah, and come back when you've let some of those stress hormones come down, when you're again better able to listen. Because as I said, when you hit that point where you become stressed, where there's incongruity in the things that are being said and the things that are being felt, because as you're passionately arguing with someone and you say, I hate you don't really mean that. But that's what comes out. And that is what the other person can hear. And even though you don't really mean it, they can take it to heart.
Yeah.
And a relationship is destroyed. You know, never, ever, ever use the things that somebody has told you in confidence. If they have made themselves vulnerable to you and shared with you things that were hurtful to them, never use those as a club in your battle,
Right. Right.
because it's difficult for them to make themselves vulnerable to you. The first time that you do that, that person will never make themselves that vulnerable to you again. And it's important to have that vulnerability in relationships.
Yeah, that's how you become close and you get to know the other person intimately, in terms of emotions. What I do, you touched on this, and I think I just want to end with this, is the relationships that we have, all of them, be it as a mom, a wife, sister, brother, whatever. The most important initial relationship is the one you have with yourself. Because once you can master that relationship of love and compassion and forgiveness for yourself, it's much more easier to extend that to others. So I just wanted to highlight that as one of those things. If I can leave that with people today, is to think about the relationship they have with themselves and really do a self-reflection and inward journey on that and see how you feel about you. Because then you will know how that is being extended to others, because it is an energy that's being exchanged of your own love for yourself. So I want to thank you for your time, your wisdom. I have attached the link to the blog in the comments for those people that are interested in getting a hold of that information and that resource. I want to wish you a wonderful weekend. I can't wait to see you next week. And if you have any parting words, this is our end now. So you can go ahead and give our parting words before I say goodbye.
Well, I would just like to say that that interview was really an insightful interview. And if people want to look up the interview, then they can just look up my name, Cheryl Bryantbruce, MD, and Valentine's Day. If you Google Cheryl Bryantbruce, MD, Valentine's Day, you'll come up with two. The first one, Forever Kind of Love, and then you'll come up with the follow-up one that I did the following year with that couple. So I think that they were wonderful interviews, wonderful insights. So please do have a look and a listen. I think that you'll get a lot out of it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Cheryl. You know I love you. I'll see you next Friday.
Okay, thanks loads, Miss Ira. Always fun to be here.
So that was the relationship currency talk. This is so important. I'm so passionate about this because I believe that if we all can start having better relationships, we will not only experience better things in our life, but we will also help humanity in terms of moving forward with love and compassion. So with that, I leave you today. Be kind to yourself and to others. I'll see you on Monday. I can't wait because I do have a very special guest on. I'll see you then. I will be here at 10 o'clock. Take care.